Hello all. Let's find our seats and get started. I know we're running just a few minutes behind. My name is Ron Buffington, and I'm the head of the department here at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. We're really pleased to have you here as we welcome to campus, to Tennessee, our fall 2016 Diane Marek visiting artist Sangram Majumdar. Tonight, Sangram will be talking with you about his creative practice, and afterwards we'll open his exhibition here. The exhibition is called Here, in the Crest Gallery. That's actually where we'll open it. We'll have a reception in the lobby, and the artist will be there with the exhibition, so you can feel free to engage him in further conversation. Everything okay? Sangram has been here with us for a few days. He helped with the exhibition, so he checked out the exhibition, oversaw some adjustments. He has met with members of the arts community here. He's spoken with students about his approach to his creative process and materials, and we just had I think a really nice professionalism panel this afternoon. So we've kept him quite busy, and he's hanging in there. He's a champion. We did compare it, though, to almost these on-campus interviews, if any of you know what that's like, this sort of grueling process of interviewing for a faculty position.
Yeah. It's like a mini shot. It's like a mini...
Yeah, it's a mini version of that.
Yeah.
But we're so happy to have you here. And I think this depth of engagement is unique to this series. And for it, we really have the artist to thank for his generosity. I also think we should recognize the director and curator of the Crest Gallery of Art, Ruth Grover, for her energy. This is a lot of work putting this together, and even just sort of managing this sort of visit, the few days of the visit itself. Certainly the ongoing support of the Marek family. John is here with us, thank you, and of course the vision of Diane Marek. So could we just give everyone a round of applause? I'd also like to recognize any of the friends of the gallery who are in the audience tonight. I have seen a couple, and it's the friends of the gallery that help to make the exhibitions in the gallery, in the Crest Gallery, that go along with these visits possible. And I think that's really the thing that makes this series unique. We have this very meaningful visit by an artist, typically slightly longer term visit than a typical visiting artist, fly in, give a lecture, fly out kind of spiel. But then a concurrent exhibition with that visit, and this is really, I think, a pretty special thing. And of course, so if there are any friends of the gallery in the audience, thank you for your support. And if you are interested in becoming a friend of the gallery, please talk with Ruth Grover afterwards, or with me. We can both talk with you about how to do that. So thank you for your support. And of course, thank you all for being here. I'm extremely excited about this exhibition. Sangram is a painter, and he'll be talking with us about painting. In the professionalism panel, he said something funny, which was, who wants to sit around talking about painting all the time? And of course, the answer was me. I'm so excited for this. It's the language that I've chosen for giving form to my own thought. But I think it's also in this exhibition you're going to see such powerful and compelling examples of thought. And I wanted to take just a minute. I don't want to embarrass you, Ruth, but Ruth wrote this wonderful thing about the exhibition and about painting, its potential for holding thought. So this is from the curator's statement. This exhibition is an oasis where the tumultuous and uncertain external world may be escaped for a time, to contemplate, repair and restore, and celebrate the grounding in reality and the elevation of being that our own perceptual senses provide. So I certainly think you'll see that is borne out in the exhibition. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Ruth Grover, and she's going to introduce the artist. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ron, very much for your support. Thank you, John Marek, for your support of this series. Let's give John a hand, please. It's become very important to us, and I think the community as well, and hopefully to Chattanooga. And thank you, Sangram, for being here. Sangram was born in Calcutta, India. He holds an MFA from Indiana University and a BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design. He's exhibited extensively, both nationally and internationally, and has lectured on his work at numerous colleges, including SVA, Pratt, RISD, SUNY Purchase in New York, Princeton University, and the New York Studio School, and we're so happy to have him at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, to that list tonight. His recent solo exhibitions include one at Georgetown University, at Stephen Harvey Fine Art Projects in New York, Rothschild Fine Art Tel Aviv, Israel, and the Kresge Art Museum in Michigan. Selected group exhibition venues include many in New York City, Brooklyn, the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the U.S. Embassy in Sierra Leone, and the Prefectural Museum of Art in Nagoya, Japan. His awards include a MacDowell Fellowship, a residency at Yaddo, a Marie Walsh Sharp Studio Space Program grant, a Trustees Award for Excellence in Teaching, and 2 Maryland State Council individual grants in painting. His work has been published in drawing textbooks, such as Drawing Essentials, A Guide to Drawing from Observation, Drawing Structure and Vision, and Exploring Life Drawing. Majumdar lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. He's a full-time professor at the painting at the Maryland Institute College of Art. And we are so happy to have you today and look forward very much to this lectures. Okay.
Quick, I'll get into this, but very, very quickly, I want to thank Ruth, I want to thank Ron, Christina. I think this exhibition, the visit, the coordination that's required to do all of this seems, I don't know if it's possible to do just by yourself, so it's like so many people coming together to do this. And it's like one of those trips, if I remove myself from the equation, if I put on my academic hat or institutional hat, it's like the types of exhibits, it's so difficult to put together, and I realize how challenging it is, so it's amazing that you guys have this opportunity, even if I remove myself from the situation, where you do have visiting artists like this come and spend time with you for multiple days, and you have an exhibition and talks and lectures. So it's great to see people taking advantage of that, which is awesome. So the lecture, it's interesting to do a lecture in conjunction with an exhibition. And often that's rarity. Often it is, you get to see the work in relationship to kind of a supposition of what the work looks like, especially if you've never seen the work in person. So this is funny, like I'm going to show you some things, some images of work that you will see in like an hour. If I don't fully convince you not to see the show, like after this talk you realize I will make a concerted effort not to go into the gallery. But if you do happen to go to the gallery, you will see the work. So what I decided I would talk around is I will talk around individual works, but I will also talk around, I suppose, what happens, how they get made, and what type of thoughts go in and out of my head. And for an hour, hopefully keep the ball rolling. And if you have questions, I know there's an opening or reception right after this, and so and I believe we're ending around 6:30. So if you do have a question as I'm talking, and it's just you need it answered right then, feel free to interrupt me and just ask, and I will do my best to answer. Otherwise, find me during the reception and ask me then, and or send me an email in about 5 months, and I'll try to remember what I said. no, don't do that. Do it within a week if you can. So with Astri's help over there, I added one more possible title for this lecture. She had a great kind of phrase that she threw out there during the morning conversation as I was trying to talk about my painting. So these are possible titles for this lecture. Painting away from, painting at some distance, almost, and as if. And that loosely gets into this place where talking about the work. Now, one of the things I often do when I give a talk, right after the end of the talk, I realize that I haven't said a few things that I probably should have said. Lights on, we're done. That was it. And I think it's interesting because I do sometimes talk around what the work is without sometimes directly addressing the most obvious things, which is that these are paintings. Majority of the work you will see, or mainly the work exists in a fairly straightforward format of canvas support on wood, cotton or linen on canvas. And I'm just going to backtrack for a second. And what are these things? I think of the work as surrogates, as rooms, as sometimes taking on more figurative tendencies, and other times they exist as kind of in between or almost hybrid conditions that kind of become an anchor or an echo. I've used the word echo a lot in my work, and so these kind of phrases and thoughts will reoccur as I'm talking. And maybe the question that often comes up is why I paint. Sometimes I feel like that's, the thing that you do often becomes the thing you don't talk about, which is when somebody asks you, like, so why do you paint? And I think for many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that they create a space that can or has the potential to exist outside language or around language or a place where language breaks apart. And especially when so much of communication involves the specificity of words and what is stated or what is inferred. I like the possibility of something existing in the world that kind of pokes at that and has the potential charge to be quite to disappear, but at the same time to provoke someone enough to elicit extreme responses. If you think about the world and what's going on around, pick your reasonings or pick your examples in your head. And I suppose the other part of that is, at the end of the day, I love the potential that a single object made possibly within a given time by a person, and therefore possibly visible, not in the digital space, but in the actuality, and that for that moment or for the period of moments you decide to encounter or to spend time with it, it exists for you. Perhaps at that moment there's a virtual ownership conversation that comes in, and then it disappears. And it's something, I often have, talk about like going and looking at paintings in person. It's like an installation shot of one of the 4 paintings that are on view in the gallery. And I love the possibility of a painting taking on this kind of anthropomorphic quality of a person or a friend or a stranger, and who you do encounter over periods of time, who doesn't change, and in a way becomes a reflection or an echo of your own inner thoughts or your own questions. In that way it kind of regenerates, or if you think in a digital space, it's kind of constantly refreshing. It's like when you kind of reopen in the same browser, but you cannot empty the cache, and it just builds up and up and up and up, but you just choose never to empty the cache. So it's like somewhere within that memory bank there is the original search, the first time you saw it, which probably isn't the first time you saw that work, and it already there's a kind of it reminds you of something that may have existed. So the way I'm going to show the work today is I'm going to talk a little bit about the framework around and the influences and how I work. This is an install shot of my former studio. before I had to move and to another studio. And I'll talk about 3 bodies of work, basically. One body, which are, and they're generally split in terms of how they relate to the body. The first group of work are larger. They're bigger than the human form. They are then shift towards a work that's much more minute, handheld, and then moving into a body of work that I think of them as torsos. And the physical echo or the physical metaphor is important in the sense that the body is not depicted in the work, and that's one. For those of you who know my work or earlier work, the human form was a big part of the work, and among many things, that's been one thing that has shifted or changed. I'm a studio painter. It's what I mean by that is the studio or this enclosure of our room becomes this place for experimentation, and I think of it as a lab, a place where there is a certain ritual of going back to the same place over and over again, but within that space, things happen over time, and time becomes, I suppose, a catalyst. I often talk about boredom being something that is a really important factor for me, because it has the potential to for something new to happen if you track it down long enough to the end point of that. This is a shot of me painting outside, just to show you that I can't really paint outside, because I basically recreate the studio outside. This happened once, and that was it. I came back from lunch, and the painting had fallen on the palette, and the easel broke, and that was it. That was my, so there's something about and I do think there's something about a certain finite and enclosure, or a place that will not change unless the building gets torn down, that I feel like is necessary, a strange familiarity, which then allows me to open up possibilities. These are images, oh gosh, can't really see anything. Anyway, the left is like a photograph of a beach in the Pacific Northwest, place I go to every summer, and the right is a very, very blurry, grayed out, low-res photograph of the kind of the space behind our kitchen window at dusk. Dusk being a time and a space that reappear in my work in multiple ways, or what that type of a time zone allows for, right? It's like a time when, if you're driving, distance is difficult to measure. It's a time when it's simultaneously, in terms of color, it's dark, but at the same time bright. And it's also this kind of space that doesn't last for very long, but it often holds a type of, it's because it doesn't last long, it becomes special. And to me, that the dragging out of that interstitial moment, I suppose, holds weight, and in a way, painting can live in that area. These are 3 photographs. I'm not a photographer. I don't, but I do take photographs, and photographs for me are kind of a question mark or a notation to myself to go back and think about a certain, it's like it's jotting things down. It's like a phrase or a series of words, and without intentionally thinking too much about location or meaning. So these 3 happen to be taken in India, but one on the left being a window I literally grew up seeing. It was like the room that it still exists, and basically what I saw out of until I was 12, until we moved to the US. Middle, it's like a view out of a restaurant. On the right, it's a 17th century castle in Orcha in the kind of in the middle of India, in Madhya Pradesh. This quick kind of a section of a studio wall. This is important to me because it's you will see a lot of finished work, and interspersed in the lecture I'll show you some things about process And a few people asked me earlier today to talk maybe a little bit about the linkage between the secondary room and the initial room, or the primary room, and so I'll try to touch on that. This is a photograph of kind of one of the most, I guess, important celebrations in West Bengal, and it happens, actually just happened a couple of weeks ago. I wasn't there, but this is one of the shots. And in a way, growing up around the idea of festivals and a certain kind of a narrative or a type of storytelling through this theatrical kind of staged narrative and a type of ritual. I think it, not in a literal sense, but in many ways, I think those types of conditions I find myself more and more becoming interested in. So, the first group of paintings I'll show you kind of relate to that. Suppose the other thing that I think a lot about in terms of painting's possibility or what painting can do is that it can misrepresent its history based on the audience and based on when it was made. For example, I don't know if these two paintings are not the same size. In fact, that the painting on the right could, fit probably in about this space of this painting. So seeing them side by side is incredibly problematic. The painting on the left, is called Dressing the Dead Girl or Dressing the Bride by Courbet, and on the right it's a early 14th century painting by Fra Angelico called The Healing of Justinian by St. Cosmas and St. Damien. It's 1400s and much later, 18. And both of them have, without getting too much into their history, I'm interested in what looks like is happening versus what the story says. Specifically on the left, if you think of the title, Dressing the Dead Girl or Dressing the Bride, and the painting, in fact, after Courbet died, was altered, as the story goes, and or even finding this kind of parallel echoes in paintings that would not have known each other's existence, or on the left, unknown painter versus Goya on the right. So for me, painting becomes this way of traveling through time, not just my own work, but painting as a discipline around which to look at the world and find connections that are not time or culture or even region specific. And that to me is incredibly exciting and interesting. This is a photograph of an old studio I had in Baltimore before I moved, and I'm just showing you this because for a while I was painting, and the idea of recreating or altering just the everyday space, kind of a general domestic or semi-domestic, because this was a live-work space, into a kind of just altered enough that it begins to feel like there's a kind of a staged quality to it, was important as a catalyst to begin to believe that something else is happening. A lot of times people ask me why, I suppose, I don't want to say why, but maybe why is it important to alter the natural environment or the given environment before the painting gets going. And for me, I think it's a little bit about, the way I interact with the world, I need to kind of change the everyday just enough, almost prevent, or I guess come in as somebody who is just shifting things, just so that I begin to believe that everything that's given is not necessarily a given. So just the idea of repainting the wall with different color, or moving the light from one side of the room to the other, or changing or bringing in a plant, suddenly it begins to have this possibility that it can become, or it can change. And around then, that gives me a possible or how would I put this? I guess that's when like the bulb begins to turn on, like, oh, well, maybe this could happen. So the painting for me begins to take off or begin with, and there's always some backstory, and often that backstory, it exists in a different way, and we'll talk a bit about that. It's another work. Let's skip past this for a little bit. I'm not going to talk about every painting, so at some point, if you want to ask about certain things, you could. One of the things that I suppose, looking at the work and the type of painter I am, there is a type of I'm breaking the work up into these kind of groups, but in fact, the way I paint, it's not project specific. I tend to work on multiple projects or multiple paintings at once, and in a way, if you think of it as a constellation of thought, some works kind of move out into the world while some reflect the world, while other works become much more about a headspace that I'm trying to do, which is in a way why I was using those phrases early on in the first image I showed as possible titles for this talk. So there is often this kind of accordion relationship I feel like I have with the world, where some of the work begins with a very factual and a very everyday quality, and I start moving away from it, and then vice versa. You know, film has often been an important part for me in terms of how I've worked. You know, I remember when and especially in terms of stretched out time, certain films like The Pickpocket by Bresson or The Sacrifice by Tarkovsky, and in some ways, like to me, certain filmmakers that do, and I have mixed feelings about this. You know, like sometimes, you know, depending on the day, I'll just like look at this and just, to me, it just seems incredibly melodramatic. But other times, to me, it feels like it has the potential to go somewhere else. And I suppose around the time I began to look more at film, I began thinking a little bit about the scale of the event. You know, the fact that like someone like Tarkovsky, like, you know, certain filmmakers that remake an entire scene and a stage after more than once because the final kind of cut got destroyed, which made me begin to think a little bit about the kind of removing myself a little bit from the world that I was making and working from. Around that time, I started kind of rethinking the idea of what is my source and where am I jumping off from. And in that way, working with a scale model that is much smaller, like maybe 6 or 7 inches or maybe 10 inches tall, as opposed to a room that's 10 or 15 feet tall that I'm in, allowing me to become both the observer but also the, I suppose, the architect of sorts, or a builder. I think a lot about, you know, so in a way, kind of, where the variables are completely at my disposal, and I can play with them. And so this is a painting that kind of is built off of that image. Sorry, everything is a little dark and high contrast. And probably around this time, and this comes up, and someone asked me this morning about this, has to do with around, you know, with some of the earlier paintings and these, someone asked me about the scale of the work, and I kind of referred very just loosely to the relationship of the body. And one of the things that has become, whether it's me beginning to think about the idea of kind of a stage, literally, or the idea of an enclosure or something kind of going around the body, that the paintings began to become not body size but slightly bigger, so that if you are in a way in front of it or within a certain distance of it, it does feel like it kind of goes around you. Simultaneously, kind of aware of this kind of historical precedent of, you know, kind of what big paintings do and a kind of overwhelming quality that they can take on. I'm interested in them doing the reverse, in them being physically perhaps expansive, but not so much as a wall or something that is dogmatic or kind of forceful, but something that actually invites and that kind of has a slow kind of burn in some ways. And in many ways, as these paintings have taken on, they have allowed me this kind of, they've become more and more hybrids, which is a word I mentioned, but also allowing me to kind of scavenge and look for ways to bridge the different inclinations I have, which have to do with a history in kind of a perceptual space, meaning a space that is out into the world, but at the same time being interested and drawn to a certain arabesque or a geometry or a graphic sensibility that I feel a relation to, whether I'm looking at Persian or Indian miniature paintings, or looking at early 14th century paintings like Frangelico, or even earlier like Giotto, kind of a medieval schematic space, or looking at Picasso, or so for me there's a kind of I feel like painting kind of allows me to pull from these things, or more recently, like being really drawn to, kind of shapes stickers, or that when you remove stickers from a page of stickers. My wife teaches violin, and often she has these packs of stickers that she gives to her students, the kids, and I always try to like take the sheets that after all the actual stickers have been removed. I suppose in many ways also, this painting is in the show. The paintings have these larger paintings because of their size. I bring this up a lot, which is I think of paintings in many ways as they, to me, have a kind of quality as a person, or has a potential to be a person, as much as a place and as much of an object. So I'm interested in coming out of this tradition of representational painting, like how to take that narrative or how to take that lineage and kind of like move it or play within that space with an awareness that we do live in a, we don't exist in a kind of, I suppose, a singular, there isn't a kind of singular dimension to any of our lives. Whether if you think in a cultural sense, in a dimensional sense, like thinking about like how much time we spend in a virtual, digital space or a physical space, or a kind of, the internet allowing us to really travel around and back. And so for me, this idea of like trying to come up with forms and places that seem to kind of hint at the body or nature, or kind of objects that have a certain kind of dimensional or interior or domestic kind of conditions. To me, I feel like they kind of are often offering, or I don't want to say that, they're often, I guess, endless, the offerings. In a way, it's like a series of permutations. There's often, like multiple possibilities, and you can always reshuffle the deck, and something kind of new comes, but that new often is familiar enough that they hold, maybe just initially enough for the viewer to enter in. I think the other thing that happened, with these paintings for me, as my work has transitioned from much more kind of a recognizable headspace, I showed a couple paintings earlier, to the work I'm making right now, has a lot to do with a kind of a forced, in a good way, or an intentional, maybe it's a better word, shift away from if you use the word figure, to the word person. So where the character or the characterization becomes more emphatic and more meaningful, and at the same time allowing for ways to simultaneously create a place where names or the nameability can sit right against legibility. I used this metaphor earlier today, which is I would like to make a, I would like to make a painting, or I'm interested in paintings, or a type of space where the word door can sit against the word opening, which kind of, you know, like, and I think in some ways that perhaps creates doubt or creates a certain uneasy condition, but I'm interested in having that uneasiness be presented without a kind of anxiety that asks the viewer to leave, but instead is more inviting and more generous. So switching gears quickly from these larger works that go on in the studio, that you know, the last 5 or 6 that you saw, they're all the same height, and so they all kind of have, I guess, a familial condition. And I think this is important because we, you know, me included, you know, sometimes you know, you go look at artists' work and you think that everything feels very unified, and I think painting specifically is that, in a way, can be faulted with creating a kind of illusion of stylistic similarity, where it begins to feel like it's or the similarity in style begins to perhaps allude to a more formed personality or a formed condition. Well, I think I realized early on that I'm not that type of an artist, that I do like doing different things, even though they all exist around the language of painting. So what one of the things I do, and wow, you really can't see that. Anyway, it's a painting of, I'll tell you what it is. This is fun. It's a small painting. It's about 12 by 12 inches of extension cord in a dark room on the floor. Imagine about 20 feet away from you. So basically you can't see anything, which is a condition that you're having right now. It's kind of interesting that without being able to see the painting, you're actually experiencing what the painting, what I was experiencing when I made the painting. An unintended consequence of this, of the fact of where daylight actually doesn't help you but blinds you from seeing a painting. Another interesting irony in this situation. So anyway, like, so I've always made, you know, like, for me, that phrase "painting away from," which it really stuck in my head because I think it's so good, or up to and away from. And for a while, I was making these paintings where I intentionally positioned myself in a place where my attention, or my, I guess you could say, my ability to decipher would be forced. It's like, you know, like trying to listen to something when the space is really muffled, you know, and having to, or, you know, like, it's like drinking something or eating something and trying to really discern and see if you can decode the flavors out of it. And some people are great at that, right, with food or wine or whatever. And for me, I think it's more about like this heightening your senses in a space that collapses your senses. So, and in many ways, those paintings were about trying to reach into a part of myself that where the unknown or a kind of where I was forcing myself out of the condition. And I realized these paintings that I was doing, and these are small, they're one shot, they had a lot to do with me trying to arrive at a type of painting that was removing just enough of the known so that the painting existed as a fiction. You know, that I don't want to give the viewer, I want the plausibility to be in the painting or dependent on the painting, not so much on the painting as a sign to the real world. And I think that's probably a much better way of saying what one of the reasons I started shifting away from a kind of prosaic description of things. These are 2 photographs. This is a painting. And it's about 30 by 24 inches. This is smaller. This is about maybe 16 inches wide. And so these things happen, they kind of exist around the studio. They just kind of, you know, I'm working, I come into the studio, I'll like something I'll see from the side of my eye, and I'll think, okay, let me work on that. And while these are smaller, they're handheld, they're done fast in a certain way, they're really important for me, and I have to say that I don't know if some of the other work would exist if these works didn't exist in many ways. And those have grown, and they have at times led to works that are more, if you want to use the word substantial, or more kind of felt and more considered. I would say this painting and the following painting are examples of that, as well as this one, all around 2012 to 13. And this painting, and that kind of way of looking, I think I talk about it as like peripheral vision, like noticing something around you. And I think that's where the studio becomes important for me, because just when everything begins to feel normal or given, you begin to notice the slight shifts within that ordinary, within the everyday. The other part of the equation that factors into the work is often drawing, and you know, there's a couple drawings. There's a few different ways of thinking about drawing that are in the second gallery in the exhibition, and perhaps one way I think of that is like drawing from or of, you know, in that kind of exchange between the subject and object, the viewer and the viewed. But also drawings in the most traditional sense, drawings as studies, drawings as rehearsed, or something that is, or in the drawing you're rehearsing something that will then appear as something. And then works on paper that are not necessarily sketches or fully complete thoughts, but are just, in a way, they just are, you know, and maybe in the most complete way to say that they're just a type of other, you know, that just is, and I try really hard not to name them as to where they fit in my studio practice, because except the fact that I very, very carefully try not to consider them minor characters, but the fact that they're kind of shadows, you know, like the fact that shadows would not exist without the form. So shadows, but at the same time, they have a lot of weight, even though, you know, it's like smoke, you can't really touch them. So these are some examples of, you know, while the preceding images were complete drawings that I was showing you, these are other ways drawings or the drawing process come through in the work. And in the second gallery, you will see an iteration of this. And this is a wall from a show a few years ago that was about drawing, or it was called Leaves, and it was about, in a peripheral way or an expanded way of thinking about drawing. And this is a body of work I made around this painting called Underwater Electric Greenhouse. And this is an example of, I feel like, what can sometimes happen is you make work, and for those of you who painted or made work for a long time, or you're beginning to make work, there will be moments where you're just working and things are going fine, and then something happens that becomes a marker or a point where is important because it changes. The work itself may not necessarily be the strongest work, but in a way it catalyzes or foreshadows ideas and thoughts to come. So this painting, after it went on for a long time, I basically accumulated, you know, just tons of these printouts that, you know, where I would print out the painting in progress and work on top of them, basically trying to figure out should I or shouldn't I, or maybes, and, you know, so in a way they're kind of momentary, you know, anywhere between a minute to 5 minute probably kind of variations of that stage of this painting that I was working on. So after the painting was done, I was getting ready to throw these things away, and I realized that in some ways the fact that the painting was complete in many ways allowed me to look at some of these scraps of 8.5 by 11 letter size paper in a different way. The fact that there's a type of shorthand and a closure that each of them, like a lot of them had, not all of them, but some of them, quite a few of them had, that I could now, because the painting was complete, I could see them without a kind of anxiety of should I or shouldn't I. So I started making a series of paintings of these paper kind of, printouts. So what you're seeing here are this before and after. And in a way, what I loved about this, or what that installation of works that I was showing you right here, in a way is about this kind of a thought that exists around an object. And I think painting so much has this history of the weight of the object, the weight of the singular experience, which is amazing in some ways, but at other time I can feel it's how it can create anxiety both for the viewer and the maker in certain situations. The fact that, and even removed from the conversation about value and etc. So I like the idea of the thought of a body, of something existing that is like an atlas of sorts, of preceding, simultaneous, and afterthoughts. That all in a way refer back to the body, and in this case the body being this painting, and but are also independent of it. Like you don't really see that painting, but you see its echo in these pieces. Here's another example. This is a drawing, like this is in the show, 8.5 by 11, that's made from a painting, just looking at the painting in progress. You may remember, or this may remind you of a painting I showed you a little while ago, one of the larger paintings. And this is the painting that's also in the show. But this painting itself, is in a way kind of a bridging or a bringing together of both this quick, like 30-second drawing on paper that is about distilling a visual experience, and at the same time working out possible iterations of itself on these things. So where the process of looking and the process of making kind of coming together into one viable reality. I'm just going to show you some intermission photos. Okay, I'll tell you what these are. I think that's important. So this is a wall, like a section of a wall that it's not fully, it's like a fragment made with fragments in Khajuraho in India. And I think one of the things I was drawn to about this, or there were multiple sections like this, that it was like a wall that was made out of actual, stones that would be used to make a wall, and then existing fragments from destroyed or kind of worn down walls that no longer had a function. So they simultaneously are made through recycling something, and the recycled material is right against something that is cut to be the shape that's necessary, like a brick, to build a wall. This is a section, this is a photograph of a kind of a famous space in Bombay, or Mumbai, depends what you want to call it. Dhobi Ghat, and it's known for its very intricate but analog system of distributing clothing that is washed, cleaned, pressed, and returned within days. Like it's extremely efficient, and it's often like a lot of the kind of major hotels will send it. Like if you say like you want to get your stuff washed, cleaned, and pressed, this is where it goes through. So it's this incredible analog version of what we now think of as a motherboard, when you open it up. And this is a photo of window with clothes hanging and bikes looking across from through a window in the house I grew up in. So we're looking, so this is the last group of images I'm going to show you. So transitioning from these larger, more kind of staged, performative, kind of character-driven or kind of hybrid that show up in the paintings to these small, kind of intimate paintings that are in many ways one shot where I'm moving in and away from kind of and in a way testing my perceptual headspace. One of the things, one of the places that right now I'm working on, or taking a break from some of the larger works, is thinking about the space of the body, or an area of the body that does exist in the middle, like the torso. So that space between 2.5 to 4 feet, right, where it can pivot. I spoke earlier that I try to make paintings that are often 6 inches or so different, like 36 by 42, or 64 by 70 or something like that, or 76 by 84. And one of the reasons I sometimes do that is because I want the orientation to be close enough that it can shift from a vertical to a horizontal, but at the same time feel like a rectangle, something that is just off enough that, depending on the image, it can veer towards a different type of an experience. And in many ways, that format and paralleling a kind of a space that is more, I suppose, within the proportion of the interior of the body, if you don't take limbs into consideration, it has a kind of possibility of you think about the idea of the surface, the skin, and then you think of the entrails, the guts, the bones, the tissue, and etc. Then within this amount of space, there is so much depth, right? Like if you're a surgeon and you're looking in and you're working, the amount of space you're dealing with might be inches, but those inches are incredibly big because of the minute decisions you have to make. On the other hand, if you're somebody who's a masseuse, like being aware of the nerve endings and etc. On the other hand, if you're just putting a shirt on or a tailor, you're very much aware of the outer perimeter, right? You're thinking about the shoulder and the neck and the waist and that kind of the frame, the format of the thing. So why am I talking about this? I suppose to be that allows a certain kind of a space, right, between what is right in front, what is known, what is given, right against a space that just kind of kicks you out, or it just gives you just enough, and then the space becomes maybe you can't measure, because it's not about linear measurement, it's not about linear distance. And so sometimes this doubling works itself out in 2 paintings. Like this is the painting on the right is in the show, the painting on the left isn't, unfortunately. We tried to get it, but unfortunately that did not work out. But so sometimes I work out these thoughts around. They often take on binaries or diptychs, and other times they exist simultaneously in the same image. This being, without getting too much into it, whether it's a projection of a room in an empty space, a collage that is also a landscape, an interior that is also scraps of paper, and a portrait, a room that is also surface. So, so there's this group of paintings that, I'm showing you like about 10 years worth of work, and each of these are done every few years. So it's this recurring interest in a type of field experience and a field that that kind of detaches at moments, cueing you to complete different universes, but then comes together in a type of fluid experience. Here's another one, a more recent painting. These are smaller. They're all like, biggest are, it's like 40 or 50 inches, and the smallest size would be about 2 feet. So some of these kind of, the conceptual thread that runs through the work is, I suppose, manifested in different kinds of material explorations. So to me, the shift between, like here, where it's about wood and paper, or kind of rectilinear dimensions against a kind of organic, kind of very minute, kind of hinting at images from Persian miniatures, to me begins to parallel this idea of the white, this kind of very intentional kind of separating of a space versus this kind of this warm yellow faux Vuillard interior that it hints at. I suppose the other thing that maybe I should mention about some of these paintings that is that I've discovered without me intentionally wanting to do that, because I don't like spending, as much as they do happen, I'm not somebody who fetishizes or gets a kick out of spending a lot more time working on a painting than it needs to. I don't like drawing out events, but sometimes they do get drawn out without, and often that happens is because I don't work backwards from an outcome. I kind of start with an impulse, and then the impulse sets up possible scenarios that I can foresee out like 10 steps, and others that I'm not sure if I should do or not because they seem alien to my nature. And sometimes I'll take that approach and then I'll backtrack, or other times I'll just take it even further to see what happens. So the idea of error or mistake or trying to regenerate a new life out of something that didn't work is important. Like this painting and this painting, in a way, are very literal examples of that thought, which is a painting that I made didn't work, so I literally started cutting out paper and taping it over things that I didn't want to see, which in turn began to create an illusion or a new type of reality. And I got, as much as I'm not a jokey painter, but these move towards a little bit of that kind of playful sense of, like, when I was talking about language in terms of nameability and legibility, that the fact that you know it's paper does not necessarily tell you, does not necessarily help you know the painting. So you have to respond to the painting in a different way while you're simultaneously responding to, in some cases, a very factual kind of condition, something that is very literal. And I do like that painting has the ability to create a one-to-one condition that a viewer can fully believe in, to the point of trickery or mimesis. On the other hand, it can kind of stretch it out to a place where you want very hard to create a language or a reference point to landscape or the figure or whatever, but the painting resists it through its nature. Earlier on, I don't know if you remember, I showed you this brick wall from this castle from a few years ago when I was traveling. And so this is a painting that happened because of that, and not because necessarily I was thinking about this, about that wall, but because the wall, I remember the story about the wall when I was going through that. It was one of these spaces where the way it's constructed, it kind of allowed somebody in the building to view out of it, versus if you're outside downstairs, you couldn't really see through. So I was interested in its relationship to, that it was, even the building a space like that has this, stranger-friend conversation and a kind of power dynamic that's acted out from the placement of the viewer and the viewed. That alongside, it was like an interesting way to make a grid painting that I wouldn't, that without making a grid painting. And then these are two other paintings that have come out of that process. So a few more images. So let's see, which are actually in the show that you'll see. So I'm going to skip through a few of these. Mainly because some of these paintings are in the show and you can ask me more specific questions about them. While, in the exhibition the work isn't hung necessarily in the same way, but often, this gives you a little bit more of a read of how I work. So often, both in terms of installation and also in terms of how I think about moving through. I often have referred to these paintings as the, door number 1, door number 2, door number 3, or wall, window, body, outside. I love this kind of, I don't want the viewer to kind of, I want there to be a given, but the given becoming a possibility of many, that you can have multiple responses to the same format or the same enclosure. So I do think about, in these cases, where the given lies, or where the known lies, or where the familiar lies, and can the familiar, in a way, become a catalyst or a way to possibly kind of think about or take you to a place that is a bit more unnerving or unusual. And maybe the familiar can both be a space that you can measure in inches, and you can feel your through the light or through ideas that allow us to kind of live in the world, like gravity, light, weight, all the things we take for granted as a way to measure our response times. On the other hand, it can actually be the thing that disappears, you know, that they're all the same size, the paintings. But what you do remember perhaps is that each one did kind of take you to different places. And so this is the last painting I'm showing you. And actually, that's not the last painting I'm showing you, but it's the last image that I'm going to show you. And ending slideshows are strange because, you know, it's kind of like, how do you end a slideshow? So I thought I would end with this image because in some ways, if one were to think about the ending of a conversation, to say that, okay, now this conversation is over, it seems very arbitrary and an impossibility because it does linger. It does linger in the people who are talking. Perhaps the two people will meet again, but perhaps even if they never meet, the fact that they think it's the end point of a conversation becomes powerful enough that the person keeps thinking about it, so it keeps going. So I thought ending a talk with an install shot of a table is great because in a way, you know, things just keep moving, and for me, that kind of fluid state is very important. You know, and then this continuing question of what is familiar, you know, what can we know based on that, and really, how close can you really get to things? Thank you. Right.
We have time for anybody?
6:37. I was like, sorry, I went over like by 7 minutes. I'm sorry. We'll just blame it on the everyone who came in late. Do we have time for a few quick questions?
Question or two?
Yes.
I wasn't at the gallery talk that you had, but I heard most of your paintings are oil paintings, correct?
Yes.
And you play around with a little bit of collage with those oil paintings as well?
Collage, well, what do you mean?
Exactly.
Like there's not literal collage on the paintings?
Yeah,
it's just paint.
Just the process of you covering things up and leaving it there.
Yeah, I think yes. I mean, I think of, you know, collage is a funny thing because I'm not so much interested in. I guess I'm interested in what happens when you do put one thing next to something or put something just behind something.
Like you're mixing your materials to
like
oil painting.
Yeah, there is a phase where things are mixed and matched and put next to each other. Often that exists not in a complete state. I mean, it'll just be very much on the surface that sometimes I use as a way to kind of think about, oh, what happens if I do this, you know, like, but the paintings themselves are a unified kind of a paint, like they're painted through. It's not like repeating, it's not like I'm cutting out canvas and gluing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not happening, yeah.
You talked about how error is important. It sounds like you, at the beginning, played with chance a little bit. How do you personally decide when to stop working on a painting and let it go and move on to the next one?
Oh yeah, that's a classic question about painting. It's the short answer is when you don't need to do anything more to it. Like, it's not about when the painting doesn't need to be. If you take a kind of a philosophical kind of a kind of almost spiritual approach. When you said like the painting becomes autonomous and it's like it has a presence, like it kind of doesn't need anything else. But on the other hand, it's like, well, it just is. Like it kind of has a certain kind of a thingness to it, you know, like Guston talks about that, you know, and just, you know, it just is, you know, and for me, it's like, I think it doesn't always happen. I think I try to see how much, you know, this, once again, it's like, it sounds strange, but to say, but like, I know the painting is getting close to being complete when I'm much more aware of its interior logic. Like it actually begins to feel like it has a climate, it has a condition, it has a presence. And so it's less more about what I want to do to it and more about what it really needs. And that's hard, and I think it happens over time. The idea of overworking a painting is often about this kind of ego management. And I think it's always a case by case in some cases, and other times it's a trial and error.
Do you consider it very important as a painter to surround yourself with areas that just inspire you to paint or get into that spiritual mode that you seem to get into when you're like painting the areas like the window? I see like a lot of the window in that painting that you had of like the brick wall, and it seemed like you were very focused in that painting, just not seeing like the strokes and all. So I just take it as you really get into maybe a deep spiritual mode in that sense. I know that was a little bit sorry.
Yeah, it's I don't know if I would use the word spiritual for myself. It's not language on which I work, but I would maybe say that I do think being focused is important for me, or staying focused, and I try not to be, if I feel like my mind's wavering or I'm kind of thinking about other things, I try to leave the studio or do something different. So, you know, I think I try to be present when I'm working. I think that's important. Kind of a. Actually, that's not really true. Sometimes it's really important for me to be just focused enough to work, but not extra focused. Like, so, and it often has to do with like having background music. Like sometimes I'll turn the radio on or something just enough that it distracts me, you know. Or if somebody's visiting, I'll keep working. And sometimes the distraction allows me to remove an overthinking or you know, just to kind of chill out a little bit. But other times I feel like it's really important to not have anything else going on. So it really depends on what I'm doing and, you know, and where I am in the work.
Okay, one more, Morel?
Yeah, I was interested in that last painting you showed us, and there's like a smaller drawing of it where it's like a video game space layout, like an aerial view, and it's got like the grid on that. I was just wondering like where that came from.
Can you clarify where that came from?
Like, so far, like there's a lot that you've talked about in your work that just seems like something that's like digital space is very different from present space and from being.
I just threw that in just to kind of. Yes and no. I mean, you know, it's like another. It's like a, you know, I mean, it's something that peaks in the work a little bit, and it's a bit. I mean, you know, it's like an image structure that I'm using, that I'm playing around with a little bit. You know, like some of these parallel places you can go to with this idea of the idea of a frame, and the fact that it is thin. You know, that the illusion is really in our heads and how much we project onto it. Otherwise, it's just, you know, and I think that's one of the things I like about that kind of period of video games, the kind of 16-bit games from the mid-90s. you know, so there's some, I'm kind of thinking about some of those places, and there are other paintings that relate to that, some that are more recognizable, like this one, and some that are not. But I think it's like another way of playing with a kind of a mechanical or a decision made by somebody else. Like, I'm sure if I went through and did research, I could find the team of, you know, coders and designers that helped with it. But I don't know if you could really track down, I'm sure you could, because the person who did it knows. But it would be really, really difficult to track down the person who designed that room or put in that code, right? Because in a way, there's so many. And to me, it's a bit like looking at certain periods of medieval painting, because you remember it more for the style and a way of working than by the individual craftsman who worked on it. Because you have a school of thought and a certain style of working, and within that you have a group of people working, and within that you may have this one guy or this one person who is doing the trees, right? So it's, and I'm interested in kind of pulling from a place that is handmade, but it's so difficult to trace back, to bring it back, and suddenly it becomes, it's like pointing to that area that is almost forgotten or almost invisible, because people, you know, if you're playing, you're thinking about the room just enough to get out of it, or that room is only important that it allows you to solve a certain function, right? Just like in a painting, the trees in the background might be just enough, might be only interesting enough to create the room to make that, you know, for the larger narrative, whether it's a garden, you know, or whether it's, you know, talking about the other space in relationship to castle walls or some kind of a village or a room. So I don't know. I like that you're pulling. It's a way for me to kind of take my view or look at something that's just off the main place, and to me is very similar to with the smaller paintings, as looking at something far enough that, you know, that I have to suddenly it becomes something new again for me. But in terms of initial thematic material, it is newer, for sure.
Okay. All right. We have a reception at the gallery waiting for you. I hope you can all join us up there. It's right up the street at the Fine Arts Center. And thank you all very much for being here.